Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Periodismo de Barrio and elTOQUE, a community of many voices. My name is Rio White, and I'll be the moderator of this event. I am the managing editor of the KSU Sentinel newspaper, and I am just delighted to be here today. The Community of Many Voices Foundation is an incubator for alternative media in Cuba, whose goal is to negotiate more flexible regulations for independent media and increase access to a depoliticized and propaganda-free press. Today, we are welcoming Elaine Díaz Rodríguez of Periodismo de Barrio and José Jasán Nieves Cárdenas of elTOQUE. Elaine is editor-in-chief and founder of Periodismo de Barrio, an independent digital magazine focused on biodiversity, pollution, sustainable development, natural disasters, and how climate change impacts vulnerable communities in Cuba. Elaine was a Nieman Foundation for Journalists Fellow at Harvard University and has freelanced for The Guardian, The New York Times, Al Jazeera, and Univision. José Jasán is a journalist and general coordinator of elTOQUE, a multimedia platform dedicated to telling the story of Cuba in all its diversity with complex, creative, and sometimes painful or hidden voices. He, with elTOQUE, established the Community of Many Voices, supporting diverse independent media in Cuba. Periodismo de Barrio recently won the prestigious Gabo Award in the text category for feature about the origins and consequences of lead poisoning in the community of San Miguel de Padrón. elTOQUE recently won the 2019 Explanatory Reporting Online Journalism Award for an interactive work with resources, debates, articles, and stories, created to increase public awareness and understanding of the constitutional reform that has taken place in Cuba. And so with that, I introduce them. So before we open the floor to questions, I think it would be justified to sort of give a general background of what they do. So I'll start with Elaine here for Periodismo de Barrio. For this award-winning piece that you did about lead poisoning, what was sort of the beginning of that, and how does the investigative process in Cuba differ from the United States?
Well, in 2016, a journalist, one of our journalists, came to our office. We don't have an office. When we say office, it's our home. So he came and said, I have a story of people in San Miguel del Padrón, and there are some kids there that have like high levels of lead poisoning in blood tests. And I was like, we have to do this, but we have to do this very careful because it's healthcare, and we have to prove it. So we cannot just go there, do 3 interviews, and publish a story. We have to do an investigation. So that's what she did. She actually went there, interviewed all the families. There were more than 4 or 6 families left there, and there were a community of people who were illegals, immigrants there. So basically, it was a complex topics because some people who were living there were rightfully owners of the houses, but some other people were not legally owners. So basically, we were scared because the government can say, hey, I can send these people to their places of origin, and that's it. That's the problem being solved. And she interviewed more than 90 people, including kids with the authorization of the parents. She interviewed the parents, she interviewed the families, she interviewed the people that were moved to another place. She interviewed the people who sold houses knowing that their kids were being poisoned, and they moved to other places. And then she went to local authorities. And that's the beginning of I think the challenges for the Cuban press in opposition to the access you have to sources here in the U.S. So when she went to the local authorities, everybody was saying no. We don't have access. We don't have information for you guys because you're an independent magazine. We don't have that kind of information. Why are you looking at that? But we had all the papers that people were saving for so many years. So basically, there was a community that didn't silence. There was a community that was raising concerns on all the levels of the government in Cuba since the beginning, since they realized the problem exists. Because the problem existed 40 years ago. It started 40 years ago, but people start realizing in 2006. And it was because a mother has 2 kids, and the 2 kids were fighting all the time. And she said, you know what, this is not normal. So she saw a documentary on television, and she saw that lead poisoning can bring people getting very hungry and upset. And she said the children, 2 children were getting a psychiatric treatment, mental health care, mental treatment?
Yes.
So when she went to the doctor this time, she said, you know what, I live in a place where there was a lead, fundición de plomo? Like an industrial lead production place for batteries. And he said, are you sure? And she said, yes, my kids, they used to play with lead. It's all over the place. It's in the soil, it's everywhere. And he said, you know what, you have to do this test, blood test, because probably that's the cause. The Mexican level of admitted lead poisoning is 10 milligrams per deciliter. Those kids were 98. Here in the United States is 5. And the official position of the healthcare, the World Healthcare is non-lead is safe. We don't need it. It's not safe. It's risky. Even if it's small, it's risky. So she kept looking for other cases, and she kept seeing the same pattern. And she just got some other stories even worse. She started asking, what about the women who were pregnant? Then she found a person who was pregnant and had 16 miscarriages. And everybody thought that was normal. And that's not normal. So basically, this person had all the papers, and everybody in the story had the papers from the blood test, the papers they sent to the local authorities, the national level, the council of the state. They sent letters to everybody. And when these kids were hospitalized, because the kids with 98 results were hospitalized, the government started trying to move the families. So they thought, hey, they're gonna fix this, they are gonna move all the families, they are gonna close the area, because there is no way you can fix that. It's in the soil, and even if you put a lot of cemento, concrete on it, they did it in 2009, and we saw on Google Earth and Google Maps that gets erased. So basically, in 5 years, there's nothing there. And they start moving the people, and in 2012, it stopped. We don't know why. They didn't answer why, but it stopped. So basically, there are more than 100 persons living there in the illegal community. They don't have the right to ask for a house because basically they are legal. And the government said that they cannot confirm or deny that that place is being poisoned by lead nowadays. But we saw it. We saw the kids in the piece. You can see the pictures. And as they are not working on this, the community doesn't have any awareness of that. So they don't know how bad it is. They start thinking that was bad because we were doing the investigation. So basically, it's not only that people are getting sick, it's people are getting sick and they don't know they are getting sick, and they are doing nothing to get out of that place because they don't know what is going on and how bad it was. For them, having kids playing with the ground and the soil and the lead is something normal. It's funny, actually. And for the journalist, I think it was a huge thing. She was very affected. I mean, if you talk with someone and say, hey, I had 16 miscarriages, or for some people who lost their children, that's big. That's big, and that's, in a personal level, I think is complicated. And in order to make the piece almost perfect, because perfect is impossible, we did a fact-checking process similar to what the New Yorker does. So after she delivered the piece, we sent 3 reporters, I was one of them, to check every single sentence. So we have only facts, not opinions. So if she said, someone say, my kid has 98 as a result of a test, we were checking what is the paper that proved that, and we did with that. And anything we had in the piece that doesn't have that sort of hard proof, we take it out. We didn't know that 6 months after that we were going to win the Gabo Prize. But even if we don't get so much attention when the piece was published and the government completely ignored it, I remember last week when she got the prize, I tweeted to the ministry, the vice ministry of deputy minister of environmental issues. I was like, hey, I think it's time to read this and do something about it. And he said, that's not climate change. And I was like, what? I was so upset. I have to take my phone down because I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna go to jail because I'm so gonna kill him. Because it's like, it's children, it's women, it's persons, it's a person's life. How can that not be like, this is not climate change, so I don't care about it. And I think now, more than ever, with the prize, the piece has received so much attention all over Latin America that I hope that we can have those people move. The only problem is those are not the only ones. When we were doing the story, and this is off the record, we found some other places. We couldn't investigate all the places because we have to focus on one, but we found at least 3 more places that we are investigating right now that have that to deal with the same issue. So it's not just one place in Cuba, it's happening more and more.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. That was really incredible. Thank you so much. Now, Jose, in your experience, you guys got an online journalism award for your work with resources, and I assume a lot of imagery was sort of involved with that as well. Can you explain to us here some of the constitutional reforms that have taken place and some of the ones that people are still fighting for in Cuba?
Yes, well, thank you for being here. Last year, starting in July 2018 and finishing the February 24th, 2019, took place a constitutional reform in Cuba. 40 years later than the previous constitution, where the socialist state was established, the Cuban state needs to reform itself in order to put, according to new times, because this is the moment where Castro's brothers will not keep ruling the country. So they started a reform, which is a very important process because it changed the state in order to follow ideas of the Chinese model, Vietnamese model, ruling the country during 10 years for a single person. The same person who is the president will be the first secretary of the Communist Party, which is the only political party allowed. It's also a very important document because it rules that the Communist Party is above the Constitution. Theoretically, the Communist Party cannot be ruled by the Constitution. Also, it was an important process because for the first time in almost 60 years of Cuban Revolution, private property was recognized. Cooperative property over non-agricultural sector also was recognized. And those are the first step for the recognition of a private sector in the economic field that will be growing in the coming years as part of the reform. It's economic reform with capitalist phases, but politically still is a communist country with a single party rule over the country. I think I need to explain to you, if you don't know it, that the Cuban system as a communist one, all the media are under the control of the Communist Party. So we are not legal media in Cuba. We are technically unemployed people. We don't have license to be freelance or simply journalist. Our medias are not recognized organizations in Cuba. So we can exist thanks to internet, because there's no borders at internet, but inside Cuba we don't have recognition. So radio, television, newspapers, agencies, and also a very important number of digital media in Cuba are under the control of the Communist Party. So the media, the main source of information for the Cuban population is the state media system. And the state media did a campaign focused on get the yes of the people in the referendum that took place last February. And they did it. The people, the majority of the people voted yes for this constitutional referendum last February. But there's they weren't played for the no campaign. So there were two options. You can say yes or no to the final document after a long debate process that took place also between August 15 to October 15, 2018. And technically, people had the chance to say what they want to say about the document. They can read it, they can make proposals, they change articles, add ideas. But the end, the results officially were about 7 million people went to the meetings, public meetings, to discuss the document. Less than 1 million make any kind of intervention. So you have people who went there, but participation really was not so big. And still, the government adapt the document, but we count only 25 real changes between the first draft and the final draft. In a document with more than 300 articles. Most of the changes were just make-up. A single word, a comma, an adjective, and non-substantious. And also, for example, 5 of those 25 important changes were just simply go back to the text of the initial constitution in 1976. For example, the idea of Cuba will be building or working to the communist system. I don't know if you are familiarized with this, but the communism is, I don't know how to say that, is, bueno. Well, socialism is the first step before you get the communism in its entire place. So the communist countries say they want to build the communism. This is a process. And in the first draft, people, the guys who wrote the document simply recognize that communism is not a real objective. So they just put away. They keep saying Cuba is a socialist state. A more pragmatic vision of the thing. Well, the assembly members and 800 people asked for put again in the document, we want to build up the communists. And they accepted. 11,000 people asked for a direct election of the president, and they didn't accept it. So the way they manage how to accept or not the suggestion of the people from the public debates, it wasn't clear, and it was politically biased. And at the end, we neither had access to the acts of the debates. It is technically possible. They could just upload all the acts, and you can check how many people say what, but they didn't give access to that. So what we did in elTOQUE, I would love to show you if it is possible. Can I do? I can move it. I can move it myself. No worries. Okay. I think it's better if I show you what we did to help the Cuban people to understand what was happening in the constitutional reform. Sorry for my fellows, friends of Periodismo de Barrio. I will show you what we did. All the idea started with a single comparison. We just wanted to compare the draft they present to the Cuban people with the original constitution from 1976, 76. And we did this. We compared both documents, and we found out how many parts or words were eliminated, how many were modified, how much of the content was new, and how much it kept the same. So, and then we decide to compare the text, and you can see it here. So we put both states, just one behind the other, or at the side of the other. And in yellow, you can see what they add, and in red, what they erased. So this was conceived as a tool for the people that were participating in these public assemblies. So they can compare, they can see, find out what were the changes, because the state media weren't doing this. They were just saying you have to say yes for the fate of the socialists, for the fate of the homeland, and everything was conceived in order to strengthen our political system. Too much propaganda, no facts. So we ask two important law researchers in Cuba, in constitutional law, and they help us giving this comparison and making some notes, as you can read. This in some articles you can see this sign. It means they made a comment there. And for example, in the first case, let me see. This one is the article that put the Communist Party over the Constitution, article number 5. So in the first draft, the Communist Party had the objective of the patriotic unity of the Cubans, and no more the march to the communist society. In the final document, we can see it here. In the second part, after this debate, people prepare, after this debate, they again reform the draft, and that new draft was submitted to the National Assembly, and then they vote unanimity, por unanimidad. Yes, so they approved the constitution, but the constitution had to go to a referendum later. Then we again compare that document with the original constitution in 1976, but also with the draft submitted to the population. And that's what we can see here. You can choose to compare. The new approval constitution compared with the previous one in the 1976 apparently has a lot of difference. 335 new paragraph and 311 paragraph just modified. So apparently they have a lot of difference, but the difference here is in the text. It's not the concept. The concept is the same. So let's see what was modified. Again, article number 5. So what happened here? They just recover the original declaration of the intention of go forward to a communist society. It was the only change it happened. Well, this is the project. Not only that, we also follow what the digital media were telling. So we did this resource. I like it a lot. A researcher, a Cuban researcher in Mexico, follow all these media. Those are digital media. How they how they follow the constitutional reform debate, and he was follow what were the topics. Each word here is a topic. So, if the color is red, the article referred to that topic was in disagree with the concept, and if it was blue, it's total agreement. So you can see, and the more reference to the topic, the more big is the word in this word cloud. So as you can see, marriage, matrimonio, and the superiority of the party were the two most debated issues. In the case of the equal marriage, that was a proposal in the first draft, most of the references were in favor of. And in the case of the superiority of the party, were against that rule in these media. We can go inside and we can see how it was treated by each media. And you can go directly even to the article. So we offer the people the option to go to read even each article. It was a very good exercise, a lot. It's a lot of information there in this piece. Well, despite this, in the second draft, it was transformed, the formulation of the paragraph about the equal marriage, in order to, in the first draft, they say is the union of two people. So in the previous constitution, it was the union between men and women. So they erased that and they just put in the first draft is the union of two people. But again, after a huge campaign of evangelical churches and a very huge movement of these churches in Cuba, they rephrased the article. They just erased that article, and let me see if I can show you how was that. 69. Oh, and they create. So they erase the marriage is the voluntary union between two persons. They eliminate that. So they just say a general definition of the marriage as a social institution. And in one of the final dispositions of the Constitution, they say that in the next 2 years, Cuban people needs to discuss a new civil code where in a new referendum, the people would vote for yes or no if they accept the equal marriage. So they just put away the issue and they just delayed the discussion because they were afraid that this issue, this particular issue, will affect the general vote in the referendum. Because these churches create a very strong campaign, they recover signatures, and they just put together more than 100,000 signatures. This was huge for the Cuban scenario. Well, this is the idea. That was the product we create in order to help the people to understand what was going with this event. So it has these kind of comparisons, public debates, videos, articles, social media resources like graphics, small things for Instagram, for YouTube, for Twitter, for Facebook, in order to increase the awareness of the population and help the people to understand. And luckily for us, it was considered for being awarded with this explanatory reporting, because it is what it is. It's an explanatory reporting of this complex process to help the people. And it's the conjunction, the joint exercise of legal experts, sociologists, journalists, designers, software developers, everybody, more than 30 people intervene in a way or other in this process. Okay. If you have any question, I'm open to that, but
yes,
here
so
we
now,
have the master of ceremony.
Now we will open the floor to questions. It can be for either one of them if anybody has any questions. Sure, go ahead.
The 100,000 people who signed to make amendments to the issue of matrimony, I mean, what segment of society did they represent?
Few, less than, the total amount of voters, there was 8 million people. So,
No, but did they represent any particular demographic or ideological?
yes, the evangelic sector. There are, in the Christian church movement, Protestant mainly, because there's the Catholic Church, which is apparently the most important church in Cuba, but they don't have more than 10% of the population. Or let me rephrase this, 10% of the population identify themselves as Catholic. But you have to include there a lot of people who really believe in religions from African origin, which are, in the Cuban case, is a very mixed religion with the Catholic, because they, due to the colonial status, they had to cover their real religion behind the representation of the Catholic imaginary. So today, even a believer of Afro-Cuban religion has to be baptized in the Catholic Church. So they are technically considered Catholic believers or members, but they are not. They have another religion. But the Christian and evangelic churches is a movement is growing fast in Cuba, especially in the eastern part of the country, and which is the poorest one. And they are, but inside the movement, there are churches we didn't fight too much for that, and in this case are only five churches. Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostales, Testigos de Jehová, Jehovah's
I would
Witness.
imagine that they would fight to keep the original wording that marriage is between a man and a woman.
They did, but they couldn't get it, because it was either you lose the evangelical community or you lose the LGBT community. So the government has been fighting for the LGBT rights so hard in the last few years, and Mariela Castro, actually the daughter of Raúl Castro, she was the face of all that fight for the LGBT community rights. So basically they couldn't change it to the way it was phrased in the very beginning, because it was too much like, come on. But at the same time, they rephrased it in a way that satisfied at least both sides, apparently.
Or at least postponed the
debate. Yep.
And the Jewish community, when I was in Havana, I saw a very thriving synagogue in the center of Havana. They have their own schools, their own community meeting house. How autonomous is that the Jewish community in Cuba?
Well, as the rest of the religions in the island, they are recognized. They have these spaces for their activities, but Cuba is a licensed state, and the Jewish community in Cuba is really small. It's mainly in Havana, and so they can do the activities, but the scholar system is not. None of the schools in Cuba has religious profile. I don't know if I'm explaining.
Even in the
No, you can do your religious activities or education as part of your religious activity, typically. But none of the schools has religion materia, asignaturas, courses inside them. So we have a licensed.
because it looked like they had a pretty big school attached to the synagogue.
But probably for activities specifically
For the community,
For the
like
community.
For example, English or social things on the community, they can do that. Yeah, yeah.
For example, Catholic Church in Havana has a very important educational center, which is the Centro Cultural Félix Varela, and they provide there a lot of courses for small private entrepreneurs. And also another courses on religion for people in the street, but it's a complex relation with the government, because the government is not happy with that. They are asking all the time why the Catholic Church is teaching people to manage business, because the government doesn't do that. And
I'm just kind of curious though. Propista, okay? If he goes into business for himself, is he still given medical coverage? Does he still have access to the medical care system?
Yes.
Is it free still, subsidized by the state?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
education for his children?
Yes.
Is there anything that he loses? For instance, a pension?
Nope.
No? He still has a pension coming to him?
Yeah.
Even though he doesn't work for the state?
Yeah.
How is that determined, the amount of the pension that he would receive?
There are different bases
Yeah.
on the tax system, and basically they pay it on the tax system, and that
From the
includes,
tax
yeah,
system?
yeah.
Okay.
They
But
decide. They decide
Yeah,
what.
So the government will collect a certain amount in taxes from their revenues or their earnings, and then a portion of that will go towards their pension?
Mhm.
Yes.
When they stop working?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
In Cuba, for example, the healthcare system doesn't work like here. So it's universal and free, but you don't need a card or something. It's not like people who get Medicaid that need to be recognized as they are getting Medicaid.
This is important because it is an issue that generates some debates in Cuba because all the Cubans we receive all a certain amount of food every month. Everybody
Subsidized.
subsidized. And even cuentapropistas, and even the people who has better incomes, and probably they can afford to pay the prices of the food, and then the government should have more resources to support those who cannot afford, because this amount of food subsidized is the same for everybody, and it's not enough to cover a month. So people are saying, there are a part of the society which has higher incomes that can afford their expenses for food, and you as a state could refocus the part you are giving us to those who need it more. But still, the state hasn't changed that. So even cuentapropistas are receiving their mandado, as we say it. So it's monthly basis. You receive your baggage of food in your local store, even those who are working on the private sector.
Well, I saw a lot of people vending right there on street corners in neighborhoods. Things like fresh tomatoes, peppers, onions, garlic, and that had to be paid for in CUCs, the convertible peso. Where do they get that food? Off of their own farms, or is that imported in from another country?
Imported not. Cuba doesn't import almost anything.
Then how do they get around?
Like that kind of processed food, we import a lot. We import 80% of the food we
tomatoes.
we have, but like tomatoes, the things you grow in the farms, we don't import it.
They are just middlemen. They are buying that to the farmers and then reselling to the people. But it is also another complex situation because
So they're like cuentapropistas themselves.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
middleman.
They have a license, so they can do that legally. And yeah.
I had a question about this. This is amazing, the detail and the time it must have taken to put all this together and all the graphics and how everything's so absolutely integrated. So what percentage of the population had access to this product?
yeah, few,
Oh,
unfortunately.
that's too
So
bad.
that's why we had to create different ways to reach the people, because less than 10,000 people saw that.
Oh,
We have a mobile app which has more than 9,000 subscribers. That's another way.
okay.
We made these public debates, but those who get more impact, the products who get more impact were some videos we did from our public presentations. So we transform a video of 1 hour in a small piece of 3 minutes with some kind of humor inside it, because the teacher, the professor who made this intervention is really funny, and he made a lot of jokes about the constitutional draft, and we just released it. It was huge. It was broadcast by television in Miami, who has impact in Cuba because the people consume it using USB pen drive. people share it, the video, through USB to USB, which is a very common practice in Cuba, even those who doesn't have access to internet. And something happened, something really funny happened to us. Let me see if with my English I can say how funny was that. One of these guys in a panel took a taxi at 10 p.m. And the lady next to him, because we had these collective taxis.
Like Uber Pool.
Like Uber Pool, but with these old American cars from 1960s and 50s. The lady next to him said out loud, I haven't slept the last 2 nights, thanks to you. Because to you. Because it was with this. The driver said, me? I didn't know you. Why are you saying that? Not you. This guy. Aren't you the guy of the constitutional debate? So that shows us that that's common in Cuba, that you don't have the exact dimension of what is the impact of your work. But this kind of products that goes USB to USB to USB or cell phone to cell phone, we are really used to share information through Bluetooth. We open the Bluetooth, hey, I have something you should see. And then in the middle of nowhere, you have your product given around the population. So for us, that anecdote, that story in particular, gave us an idea of how much the people were seeing. And then again, it happened with the second debate we did. One of the people in the public made an intervention. We published all the debate, but somebody took only the intervention of this guy and shared it in their social media. Our video has 50,000 views. Their video has almost 200,000 views. So there's no way to measure the total impact, but I think a lot of people saw at least a part of a product. And we saw the impact in our work. The brand is very well known. After that, we have been covering the judicial, the law, transformation, because after the Constitution, there are an entire process of changes. More than 60 laws must be changed in the coming years. So we are following that process at the same time, because we learned that there we have an opportunity to translate from this hard knowledge of the expert to products more friendly to the audience.
I had a question about the lead. Is the source of the lead known? Is it like natural, or was it brought somehow? And because there's no point in reducing the lead poisoning in everyone if it's going to show up again. So is the source of the lead known?
Yeah. It was a Fundición de Plomo. It was a factory there. Before 1959, there was a factory there, and people were making batteries. So after the revolution, the factory was closed down, and the owners died after many years. So, but all the lead stayed there, and they didn't know about it. I mean, I think in 1960, nobody knew about the effects of the lead anywhere in the world. But in 2016, yeah, definitely we knew. So in 2019, they tried to remediate the place. So they do this concrete, they put concrete there so they can tap it, like cover the soil, because you have to cover the soil, and it's like Chernobyl, you know. It's like what you saw in Chernobyl. You have to take all that land and bury it and then cover it. So, but it was so bad. Like the process was really bad, and they couldn't do it in a good way, an efficient way. So 3 years later, it was the same. And the problem is, like, if you have been exposed to lead and you have been treated on the hospital, it's even worse. because you cannot go back to the same place. If you haven't received treatment and you keep living there, you have more chances to survive than if you receive treatment and you go back to the place. That was what was happening with the kids, that after getting the treatment and going back to the same place, they got worse. And you say why? Because they got treatment, but the defenses, like the defenses of the body, yeah, the immune system was so bad, so they couldn't go there. And the only kids that have been like safe are the ones who went straight from the hospital to other place and never go back.
Did I understand you right that the Constitution accepts direct election of a president? That the Constitution says we will have a direct election of a president?
No.
It does not, okay.
No, it's the National Assembly who decide among their members who is the president, who is the vice president. So, in fact, in coming 2 days, let's see, today is 8, next October 10th, we have an election. They will elect for the first term the present president, Miguel Díaz-Canel, because his position, the name of his position is according to the former constitution. Now he has to take the office under the new constitution, which has some changes because the former role was president of the Council of State and the Council of Ministers. Two colegiados, like a collective organs, where apparently the direction was collective. He was just only the guy with the final signature. Now, the Cuban Constitution retook the concept of President of the Republic, which a lot of power in the hands of the single figure of the president. He is no longer the president of collective organs. He's now a single figure with a lot of power, apparently with counterweights in the National Assembly. But there's no real thing. So now, next Thursday, Miguel Díaz-Canel will be competing with Miguel Díaz-Canel to be elected as the new president. Apparently, there's an entire commission of candidacies that will prepare election paper. Ballots. So the members of the National Assembly will elect among them who will be the next president, but everybody knows who will be the next president.
And who names the National Assembly, the members of the National Assembly?
Well, in the national election, the members of the National Assembly are elected. The half of them are representative from the local level. People elected in local elections to the local government, the municipal level. And the other half of them are nationally nominated. So there are people who is not living in the towns and cities, who are athletes, musicians, politicians of the national level, who are nominated through these local communities. So people also, everybody vote at the same time for the same, unanimous, all the votations. If you see a session of the National Assembly, who, despite everything, also it's gathered 2 times per year, 4 days, that's our Congress. So can you imagine how much laws they can prepare and they can discuss in this period? Who is in favor? Everybody. Who is against? Abstentions. So people doesn't believe in this organ because it's a play. almost a theater play.
And also, I would like to add that the national elections, I mean, the elections for the National Assembly are every 5 years, and you get a ballot, and you get to vote for people separately, but you don't get to elect one. I mean, you don't have to choose. You vote either for all of them, for one of them, or for some of them, but still they get elected, because if they can get more than 50% of the votes, they get elected either way. So it's not like you are electing between different people running for the same position. You're electing if there are more than 600 parliaments, parliaments, then you will have the total amount of persons in the ballot will be 600. So it's not competitive. But in the local level, on the other hand, is really interesting because it's competing. So basically, people run for office, even though it's not like here, so you don't do propaganda or something like that. You just post a biography or curriculum in different places from your community, and your community gets to nominate people, and they run against each other. So for me, it's really interesting the way it's at the local level, because there is some kind of competition there, and as people are living, they have to live in the community, they have to work or at least be like really related to the person there. It has a certain level of representativeness, which is important. And at the National Assembly, it has to be at least 50% of those people, which is nice because all of them were directed by their community. Although they were not elected by the whole country, they were elected by some community. But the other 50% get elected by what we call the massive organizations, which is, for example, the Workers' Union, the Federation for the Women, all the organizations except the Communist Party and the Young Communist Party Union, because the elections, the way elections works in Cuba is like parties. The Communist Party, at least nominally, cannot nominate, not parliaments, local governors, or presidents, or anything. It's like a separate structure. The problem is the reality, but in theory, it's separated. And the other thing interesting is, like in Cuba, local governments or national governments in the parliamentary session, they don't get paid. So basically, it's a voluntary job you do with your current job. That's why they just met 2 times a year, because they have a work. They don't work as a parliament. Some of them do, but it's a few. When I was local governor in 2010, I was working as a professor at the University of Havana. Imagine being a professor at a university here and being local governor and being in front of your constituents and have to answer to their questions and have to fix the local problems. So basically, what they are discussing now, which is really interesting, is how to fix that. How to have a parliament that actually works, that can meet more than 2 times a year, but how can those people can make money from that without converting it in a way of life and screw the whole thing. So I was inside the problem. I'm now outside the problem, but I don't have the solution, because I say the moment you put money on the local governors, it will become a business. And if you don't put money on those people, they don't have time. It's impossible to have like 3 lives. It's not possible. So it's really complicated. I don't know the solution. I don't know what they are gonna do, but it's hard now to find a solution for that.
Yeah, but
now that I would like to know more about how the society has been getting used to independent journalists, in the sense of how, in order to find sources and to find people that will share information, how has been the process? Because I can guess that at the beginning was pretty difficult to get. I mean, I'm not speaking about the official institution, but just informers of all kinds. How people are aware that they have this media and they are doing a new kind of journalism? small community?
In our case, as we work with vulnerable communities to climate change, we work with people that have nothing else to lose. So basically, it's either you talk with an independent news media outlet or you talk with no one. So if we work, with, for example, with entrepreneurs or something, some people that have something to lose, it would be difficult. But for us, it's like when you go to an unhealthy neighborhood, or you go to these people who were late poisoned, or you do a story on people suffering healthcare issues because an open landfill. It's like they know that the official press or the state media outlets will never go there, will never listen the story, will never tell the story. And it's either you talk to us or you have no one to talk to. And it has been, it's more diverse right now because before, 4 years ago, we have to go to the communities every time. And we don't know every place in Cuba. We don't know every problem. We didn't know there was San Miguel with this problem. We didn't know that, we still don't know how many environmental issues affecting healthcare in Cuba we can find. And now, people are using social media to contact us. So basically, if someone has a problem, they say, hey, you can write to these independent news media outlets and see what they can do. And we are receiving more and more and more stories from people trying to tell the stories of their communities. And sometimes they want to go on the record, sometimes they don't want. We have also whistleblowers and people inside, for example, inside enterprises, factories in Cuba that are very polluting, and they cannot go on the record, but they say, hey, my factory is doing this, and you need to take care, and you need to investigate, which is really helpful, because that way we know what to find. Otherwise, we have to start from the beginning, which is really hard.
In my case, it's a little complex because one of our focus are entrepreneurship. We believe entrepreneurs are very good examples of citizens. And we in Cuba believe that we need to start to build citizenship, because the citizens need to understand they are citizens. They have rights. They have, the state has duties with them. And they need to know the laws and exercise their rights. That's something that is still just beginning in Cuba, the construction of that knowledge in the people and awareness in the people. But when we try to show what the entrepreneurs are doing, because the private sector in Cuba is still seen by the government as the necessary evil. They are not comfortable with the private sector, but they need to accept it, because it's the only way they can start to refresh the economy. But still, when you see how the state media cover the issues, the problems, and the stories of the private sector, there's always a bias. There's always a way to present the things like the bad guys of the movie are these people. If the prices are going up, it's due to the private sector. If you cannot get a taxi, it's because the private sector is elevating the prices, but they don't say that you cannot find gasoline, you cannot find. So that's why we decided to show the other hand, the other part of the story. And we give to the private sector a place where their stories can be known, can be published. But we have also faced the problem that some private people from the private sector doesn't want to appear, or they prefer to control what are you going to say. When you live in a totalitarianism, you develop your own dictatorship inside. All the time you want to control what other people want to say about you. And that's an issue. We have been working a lot trying to educate people with what journalism is. We are not public relationship department. If you want advertisement, pay for it. Not for us, but to everybody. But in our case, we are doing journalism. So you have to be prepared. Everything you say goes public, and who decide what goes are us, not you. But at the end, still, they are more open that the state organizations to give interviews, to make a statement in issues, because they do understand the importance of the press. And after 2 or 3 episodes, at the end also they understand this is not a public relationship department, this is another rule of this new independent media playing in our society.
Well, go ahead. Well, yeah.
Just following up on that, so because you're operating as independent media and you're outside of the official discourse for media, and you're relying heavily on these sources that you have to vet yourself and that constitute most of the stories that you're putting out, do you ever find yourself in situations where the state media challenges the legitimacy of your sources?
No, so far.
Not so far.
I mean, it's because we cannot publish every day, and one of the reasons is because we have to blindar,
Offer?
like no,
Blindar?
blindar, like put words. Make sure, yeah, protects every story. So that takes a lot of time. Now they are challenging the price. They are saying they are making silence. They cannot even challenge the price because the price is after Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which was a close friend to Fidel Castro. So if they challenge the price, I don't know what they are going to do next. But they did silence. But they cannot say it's not true, not once. This vice minister, what did he say? This is not climate change. He didn't say you are lying. He said this is not climate change. So that's good. That's good.
All right, well, we'd like to thank everybody for coming out here. We'd especially like to thank Elaine and Jose for coming here and giving us some really great insight to their experience at Cuba. And so this concludes. Welcome to Periodismo de Barrio and elTOQUE, a community of many voices. Thank you very much.
Thank you.